Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for our latest research seminar hosted by Drama and Theatre Arts here at the University of Birmingham. I'm Adam Ledger. I'm a reader in theatre and performance here in the department, and my job is only to introduce Avra, and I'm going to hand over to my colleague Graham a little bit later on in proceedings to field any questions and discussions that we might have. And I'm delighted to welcome Avra Sidiropoulou, who is joining us from the Open University of Cyprus, where Avra is the Associate Professor of Theatre and also the Artistic Director of Athens-based theatre company Persona Theatre Company. Avra's most recent publications include Adapting Greek Tragedy, Contemporary Contexts for Ancient Texts, and Staging 21st Century Tragedies, Theatre, Politics, and Global Crisis. And with me is currently co-editing a special edition. We are, aren't we, Avra?
We are.
We are. We're doing well. A special issue on director training for theatre, dance, and performance training, the journal. Avra has been visiting scholar at various institutions, including at Columbia University, where she also undertook the theatre directing MFA hosted by Anne Bogart, who's also visited us here in the department. And Avra's next directing project is Karen Malpete's new play Troy 2, which she'll direct at the Here Art Center in New York in May of this year. And today, however, Avra will be sharing her reflections on working with digital media in theatre.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here today and share some of my thoughts in research and also practice with technology in the rehearsal room. So I'm going to start with a little bit of context. Some things are known, of course, but I think it's good to voice some of the things that have been said about this whole issue of directing with technology, and then move on to examples from my own work that might shed some light on my thinking about all this. So the innate limitations of the live medium have paradoxically established the theatre as the most human of art forms. However, the representational possibilities available in traditional modes of theatre making are finite and subject to the relentless competition of video and film. Marking a departure from the dramatic towards the post-dramatic, to recall Hans T. Lehmann's semiologism, the digital turn has made it easier for theatre to transcend its irrefutable form of constrictions. In fact, the media has created a, quote, indeterminate status between the potential of performance and its actualization, a virtuality that takes several forms. From the simple use of video screens and microphones to gaming applications to telematics, robot theatre, and data bodies on stage. The acceptance that there is nothing more illusory in performance than the illusion of the unmediated goes together with the understanding that the expectations of a media-saturated audience keep changing dramatically, adjusting to the inevitable establishment of information technologies as an indispensable component in nearly every sector of our private lives. Indeed, audiences seem impatient with received theatre narratology and more comfortable perceiving things that are defined by fresh forms of connectivity. To also engage younger spectators who are addicted to the patterns of gaming, the expediency of apps, and the counterfeit intimacy of social media, technology sets out to create instantly recognizable spaces and rhythms, pitting the outside world against more traditional or even dated literary and performative conventions, also in an attempt to defy theatre's artifice. As a result, revised interdisciplinary hybrid modes of artistic research and expression are progressively emerging as important constitutional tools. These complex, porous dramaturgies, art forms that are uncomfortable, discontinuous, destabilizing, frenetic, allow for new information, theories, and discoveries to enter the domain of dramaticity. Needless to say, further to updating theatre's polyphonic system of information, to remember Roland Barthes, the integration of media into live performance also attests to the genre's instinct for self-preservation, asking essential questions about theater's ontology and the different manifestations of performativity in a post-humanist era. After all, quote, both human and non-human agents in contemporary performance can be said to possess a dramatic potency that is readable in terms of human experience, end quote. In this sense, the theater narratives have not disappeared, but rather changed. Their operative force has found more efficient spaces to which to flow. Quote, they increasingly operate through the invisible efficiencies of technological interfaces and their careful regulation of subjectivities, end quote. In my view, what makes digital articulation a co-contextuality and an attractive strategy of theater making is its ability to influence the effective meaning of a scene, primarily by introducing divergent narrative angles and manipulating stage semiotics beyond the instantly visible. Some directors describe their turn to technology as the result of a rather natural impulse, pushing them to explore alternatives in staging. As for me, I find working with video, pre-recorded text, and animation liberating. I am now, I think, less intimidated by representational challenges and more eager to stretch out of my director's comfort zone. Since 2009, I have been working with video and film in productions of contemporary and classical works, in free adaptations of popular myths and literary texts. More recently, I have been adjusting narrative and dramatic writing to a film format, working on mixed media adaptations conceived entirely for online streaming, and I'm sure most of us have experimented with that during the pandemic. So in the long COVID years, I engaged with a visual animation project based on Charlotte Perkins Gilman's 19th century autobiographical novella, The Yellow Wallpaper, which is still in progress. This coming May, I will be staging a hybrid production of Troy 2, a contemporary short play, as Adam mentioned, by American writer Karen McBead in New York. And these are some of the still images taken from the film shoot that we recently held in Athens that are going to be part of the production. In New York, the video will be used not only to bridge the timeframes, geographies, and cultures that the play brings forth, but will hopefully usher the digital presences of the group performers into the live action of the multiracial American cast and chorus. So through my so-called directorial method, and I say this with a sense of knowing very well that methodologies keep changing according to projects. And though this directorial method adapts to the particularities of each project, I have, however, worked with what I'd like to call compositional dramaturgy, which is a process in which image, text, and sound emerge and develop simultaneously, with one aspect informing the other. Rehearsals are thus structured and managed to allow individual threads of creativity to develop concurrently in no hierarchical order. When it comes to using media, I usually work with the video, the film designer, and the dramaturg in rehearsal, even if remotely. Clearly, as is the case in all collaboration, engaged dialogue and brainstorming are essential. This way, we try to generate material by means of associating what the actors produce, often by improvising, with specific images or sequences that we have originally in mind for particular sequences in the play. This mode of rehearsing prevailed during Phaedra I, which was produced by Persona Theatre Company at Tristan Bates Theatre in London in 2019. The palimpsestic text, which revisits Euripides' classical story of unrequited love, comes to life through projections that establish a striking visual landscape. The performer's costume is her whole world and functions as a projection screen, allowing her to interact with the other characters of the play who are digitally represented. The scenographer, also costume, also video designer, Michaela Iacata, was present during the workshop phase of the project as the text was being devised and the environment of the play determined. After an intensive period of textual work between the actor, Elena Pelon, and myself, Lakata returned to the rehearsal room till opening night. Initially, staging the play was largely dependent on making the video serve the actor and the text. It is worth noting that as we were preparing the video sequences and mapping in our laptops, sometimes the images refused to cooperate with the performer, slipping and hiding away in different folds and corners of their oversized dress. Thankfully, the actor quickly adapted to the quirks of technology, efficiently improvising her physical responses to the rebellious video selves. Some of her acting adjustments provided extra layers of interpretation, and as a result, were kept in performance. Technology's resistance to the fluid reality of the stage was manipulated to trace the way in which the dramaturgy of the play evolved collaboratively. As Pelon became increasingly confident in connecting with her electronically simulated world, traditional notions of digital semiosis as a means of shedding light on the text became irrelevant. After a while, we were all less preoccupied with matching image with movement and more interested in using video to highlight existing ruptures in the story. So technology is very often a simple and most eloquent way of providing scenography, because there is nothing to interrupt its capacity to represent actual spaces and sites, no matter how distant or bizarre these may be. In many productions, digitization has become inseparable from theatrical design, creating visual and narrative collisions, whereby, whether by a simple projection of still photography at the back wall of the theater, a pre-recorded action played on the screen, or more sophisticated mediaturgies. The digital component commonly acts as a pictorial feature that can add background and detail in places where the live medium alone proves inadequate. Furthermore, it redefines and empowers the narrational, sensory, and emotional properties of stage images, while also serving the audience's willing suspension of disbelief. The artifice of the theater is enthusiastically accepted because the means that are employed to build the illusion are now updated to match the spectator's rich arsenal of visual, audio, and media references. Such was the logic behind the visual environment that hosted the 9 scenes of the play Machina, which I directed at the Cyprus Theatre Organization in 2022. In this 1928 expressionist American work, a young woman's ambitions for an independent life with meaningful relationships crashes against the relentless imperatives of her time. The different structures of the modern, impersonal, capitalist society, work, marriage, family, justice, religion, are cogs in a machine that eradicates the slightest vestige of personal will. Our show applied abstraction. Each episode happens in a distinct spatio-temporal context and places the heroine, Helen, in various circumstances. We follow her journey from the featureless office to the uninviting home she shares with her nagging mother, to a cheap tourist resort where she spends her honeymoon, and the underground bar where she meets a lover, as well as in various other public and private situations. Each of the 9 spaces becomes a different scenic adventure. The single stage space is transformed internally as scenes blend into each other or interrupt violently those that precede or succeed them, creating parallel zones of perception where lived and imaginary experiences coexist. This constant parallelism and perpetual flows enhanced by kinesthetic plasticity, changes in musical rhythm and video art. The main thematic metaphor of the play, the machine, has different visual manifestations, but each of them ultimately serves its seamless operation and its absolute dominance. In City Trilogy, a triptych of 3 allegorical one-act plays by modern Greek writer Lula Nahumstaki, written in 1965, which I presented as a stage reading, again at the Cyprus Theatre Organization in 2018, video was used both to situate the physical action of the plays more clearly, but also as a way of exploring subtext in scripts that are notoriously elliptical, ambiguous, and highly parabolic. Unfortunately, I have very few pictures from that stage reading, and none of them are any quality, so I'm just using stills from the video projections. Those projections function as pictorial background to the narrated action, providing a visual constant. Because of the nature of the production, a stage reading, the actors in Poli, the city, were seated around a table in what seemed to be the interior of a house. The still image of a single naked bulb burning was projected in full screen at a large gray background surface, indicating a living room wall. In the Anithérευση, the overnight stay, the interior of a train, which travels at seemingly zero speed, documents the journey of the female protagonist to an unknown destination, but also references her internal voyage. In Parélαση, the parade, the most allegorical and dystopic of all of Anagnostakis' plays, an expanse of sky with removable clouds provides the only visual escape for the two young siblings who are locked in their attic room by their father before eventually witnessing a gruesome execution scene. Although these elements served a predominantly scenographic function, they also suggested a mood of mental and psychological stagnation for the characters, all of whom were held literally or symbolically captive. In Phaedra I, the visual element absorbed scenographic semiosis entirely. Throughout the play, the video stills and projections offer indications of location. In the opening sequence, where Phaedra interacts with a chorus of women, the long white dress is imprinted with a video likeness of a classical marble tiller, which takes us straight to the mythical past of Greece. Phaedra's private corporeal self grows into a public space, images of urban life, but also of natural disasters from the recent history of Greece, underline the clash between the country's past and present. Significantly, the fire-spreading images at the opening of the performance carry the audience through to the final impression of scattered debris in a landfill in the closing of the play. Now, those sequences had a very specific significance for the Greek audiences in London, as the play was being presented a few months after the catastrophic wildfires in the Attica region of Mati, which actually killed over 100 people and left the country in a state of perpetual mourning. Evidently, digital design has been popular also because of its bypassing the practicalities and financial quandaries of having to build elaborate sets. This functionality, something's happening. Yes. This functionality notwithstanding, multimedia narratives. Just give it a bit.
Sorry, I'm mute back.
Shall I?
No. Sorry, I've got it.
Give us a minute to solve technological issues, right? Since we're talking. Okay, I think that's fine. Right. So this functionality notwithstanding, multimedia narratives encourage ambiguity. In addition to defining shifting spatialities and situating the action in a literal sense, they can sculpt psychic landscapes where the real seeps into the mind. In this way, they also bring to light aspects of the text that had originally felt obscure and impenetrable. There are times, for example, when what is understated in the text is revealed through a simple yet transgressive visual or auditory reference. This was the case with Persona's production of And God Said, which was presented in Istanbul in 2010 and Tehran in 2011, a trilingual piece in English, Turkish, and Farsi about a dystopic world hit by an unnamed ecological catastrophe. The design evoked a post-apocalyptic universe where foggy memories and hallucinatory visions came together. Animation was used amply to produce associative images that represented the turmoil in the afflicted characters' minds. In recalling the night when the enigmatic destruction hit, the male character is haunted by nightmarish images that are expressly projected as a backdrop of the set. As the female protagonist emerges into the nuclear-like environment, she struggles to piece together a plan for her uncertain future while trying to remember who she is and where she comes from. The animation conjures up a cosmos of shapes and colors that reinforce the sense of devastation that the two characters experience as they are stranded in a surrealist known place, left with nothing but random recollections. Far from being descriptive or merely substituting for missing action, digital storytelling can offer additional emotional and cognitive content. The production of Enter Hamlet, based on the text that I wrote, premiered at the International Shakespeare Fringe Festival in Verona back in August 22. Inspired by Shakespeare's iconic character, Persona's production brings the androgynous figure of the performer center stage, where she is often visited by the ghost of her father, King Hamlet. The split character remains trapped in her memories as they appear in video projections of his life events and dreamlike occurrences. These places gradually occupy Hamlet's actual space and consciousness, drawing him into a spectral visual and auditory world, one that he finally embraces in an emphatic act of visual catharsis. The experimental vocal improvisations by the French musician Muriel Louveau also contribute to this encounter between the live and the virtual. Pre-recorded, they accompany Hamlet's inner thoughts, fleshing out the visions and dramatic figures with which he interacts. In Maria Borisova, an adaptation of Fyodor Dostoevsky's novella A Meek Girl, which was done in Studio Matomikali in Athens in 2013, the title protagonist's suicide is depicted on a screen which covers the entire upstage area, a physical as well as psychological border that divides the world of the young woman from that of her emotionally estranged husband. Projections are used also to convey different episodes from the married couple's life. In one sequence, and again, really bad images, I'm sorry about that, it's an old production. The actress is video captured pointing a gun at her husband, but the moment is deliberately ambiguous. The audience remains unsure whether this dreadful event took place or was simply another paranoid scenario playing in the mind of the male character. Towards the end of the show, Maria steps towards her mediatized death, appearing to leap into the void. And here, the pre-recorded sequence of the actor jumping out of a window frame plays out the character's suicide. In Ibsen's A Doll's House, which was done in Nicosia and in Limassol in Cyprus in 2019, working on the scene which has Nora play with her children, the video designer and Avra Sidiropoulou and myself came up with a film version of a merry-go-round game between the character and her kids. The practical difficulties of working with children and having them perform in the show forced us to think of alternatives, such as filming the children beforehand. Further to solving a practical problem, however, the sequence made Nora's conflicted realities even more poignant. The idyllic life of apparent comfort and familial pleasure, depicted in the video of Nora interacting happily with her children, is violently interrupted by the sudden alarming entrance of the blackmailer Krogstad, whose presence harbingers Nora's downfall. The digital presences serve to communicate the fleeting nature of joy and the shaky foundations of the Helmer's marriage, in sharp contrast with the palpable carnality of the blackmailer's intrusion. Equally, the characteristic tarantella dance that leads up to the climax of the play had Nora stand on top of a cyclical structure center stage against background projections of the actress frantically and freely moving to the music. The tarantella holds a prominent position in Ibsen's text as it demarcates the beginning of the end for Nora, which is soon to culminate in the play's Aristotelian moment of crisis, eventually driving her towards enlightenment, recognition. In our production, Nora is placed on top of this revolving disc, quite still, but keeping a ballerina position, as if on display in a toy shop. While every other character in the play stands by admiring, but also admonishing her to follow the dance's steps more accurately, the audience also watches a video of the filmed version of the dance, in which clearly Nora lets herself go, surrendering to her despair. At the end of the sequence, the actor collapses on the circular surface, exhausted. The contrast between her physical stillness and the nearly demonic dance captured on video is highly ironic, as it illustrates the rift between her internal condition of paralysis and the effort to keep the show going for her husband and her social circle. Here, digital transformation brings emotional escalation in seminal points of the action. This also happens in Machinal. During Helen's trial scene, flashing newspaper headlines, as the protagonist is about to confess her crime, appear to have already judged and condemned her, absorbing almost every other visual reference of the show. In Phaedra I, the ostensibly domestic scene between Phaedra and Theseus, where the former shares her sentiments of boredom and disenchantment to the latter, features a video of an elegantly arranged cluster of male and female naked bodies writhing languidly in white sheets. This image reveals a subtext underneath Phaedra's post-coitum musings. The integration of dialogue with a visually absent Theseus' pre-recorded voice also serves to that effect. Later, in the nightclub scene, where Phaedra meets Hippolytus for the first time, I think I'm missing something here, probably, like an image. A projection of the bottom half of a woman's body in short skirt and fishnet stockings, seated on a bar stool, captures both setting and mood. The way Phaedra crosses and uncrosses her legs, while the performer continues to sit still underneath her costume, resonates with a comedic feel. At the same time, what appears to be Hippolytus' male torso sneaks into the projection, creating a sensual ambience, which is contrasted by the soundscape of recorded voices, castigating Phaedra's lust for her young stepson. In fact, the video also follows Phaedra's fantasy, portraying a voluptuous dance with the object of their desire, represented by two male hands that move slowly and intimately up and down parts of the glittery dress. In addition, the visual of Phaedra's sexy dangling stilettos luring Hippolytus into small talk alternates with pink rose petals that in the video fall over Phaedra as she sings a country ballad in a moment of teenage elation. These images serve to unearth different stereotypes of femininity and the prejudices of the judgmental chorus about her theme. That was the one before, with the crossing and uncrossing of her legs. Highlighting the protagonist's conflicting emotions, the sequence entitled Contempt follows Phaedra's transformation from a love-torn, dejected woman into an enlightened character who philosophizes on the nature of rejection and being human and vulnerable. Phaedra's costume digitally turns into a barren, cracked piece of earth that trembles throughout, suggestive of earthquake tremors, while her speech is nearly synchronized with the quavering landscape. The combination of image, intermittent sound, and staccato delivery underlines the scene's disjointed sensation. Undoubtedly, digital technologies deepen and expand the perception of time and space, altering our perceptual mechanisms and changing, as Arnold Aronson comments, the way we see, and more importantly, the way we think. Moreover, as Lisbeth Brut-Niebelling and Sigrid Merckx point out, in intermedial performance, perceptual expectations are often played with or even explicitly deconstructed, thus producing sensations ranging from subtle experiences of surprise or confusion to more uncanny experiences of dislocation, displacement, or alienation. A quote, disturbance of the senses and a blurring of realities is the manifestation of the clash between digitally influenced perceptions and embodied presence, end quote. By virtue of its mediating properties, technology introduces heterotopic zones of endless possibilities, inviting allegory to enter the private. Engagement with the media also reinforces the heterochronic element, blending past and present into one ahistoric mythical dimension. Thus, from a director's point of view, digital articulation influences the entire makeup of the theater narrative, sharpens the usage of visual and auditory signs, and structures performance in non-linear ways. The action is maneuvered backwards and forward. It can be paused and repeated at will. In doing so, it can cover the entire expanse of history through to the present, leaping over historical milestones, bridging the gap of eras, and deepening and distending our experience of time. In Machinal, in the maternity ward scene, the protagonist, exhausted by her recent labor and other people's expectations of her role as a mother in a suffocating patriarchal society, engages in a mind game with her own fears. In a delirious stage sequence that once again splits her identity into living through movement and mediated through her recorded voice, Helen leaves reality behind. diving into fantasy, visually manifest in projections of geometrical shapes repeated in a loop to mirror her emotional impasse. Briony Lavery's 1999 play Frozen, which I directed in 2020 in Cyprus, brought together three interconnected stories of a pedophile serial killer, the mother of one of the girls he abducted and murdered, and a psychiatrist who investigates the biological roots of evil. The three narrative points of view make for a structurally complex text with a temporally and geographically expansive narrative. Once again, we try to resist the temptation of letting videos simply illustrate the rapidly shifting locations, as the action takes place during the span of 20 years and moves from one location to another. Instead, the imagery revealed subtle emotional temperatures associated with the suffering, confusion, and rage, which are in the heart of the text. Some footage was more literally connected to the events of the plot, as for example, the video of a van crossing an expanse of empty space when the male protagonist recounts his method of capturing his victims. But more than anything, the design juxtaposed or tried to juxtapose three divergent outlooks about one single incident. To that end, different video motifs were created and linked to each character's engagement with the principal dramatic event, the abduction and killing of the 10-year-old Rona. Video was engaged to amplify the impact of special moments, as when Nancy, Rona's mother, who joins a missing children's organization under the watchful eye of her daughter, is always appearing to speak in her presence. 20 years later, when the police inform her of the recent findings of their investigation, she follows the officer to a rundown shack where the body of the girl had just been discovered. All through Nancy's suspenseful itinerary, the video projects fragments of the girl's image, which in black and white version is played against the action of the shack being demolished, an operation which Nancy decides to attend as an opportunity for a final farewell to her daughter. The fading image of the girl emphasizes the inexorability of her death. When Ralph is present on stage, his scattered thoughts range from reminiscing the actual event, both at home and later in prison, and reliving it moment to moment. The projections follow his state of mind as they alternate between the van, just seen, journeying through and towards his victims, and a muddier, anarchic video collage of several young girls enjoying carefree childhood moments. Gradually, their faces dissolve into visuals of neurons of the brain system, which in turn become tree trunks in an eerie forest. All three reference, girls, brain, trees, point to the sick act and the assumed locale of abduction, violation, and killing of the victims. Finally, Agneta, the psychiatric researcher, conducts her keynote lecture using visual references to Ralph's damaged brain. The image of a blinking brain is projected behind the sexual predator during the scenes in which he is being examined by the expert psychiatrist, an image that serves to underline the neurological basis of the text's main argument, that is the possibility that the criminal brain is physically damaged. Technology proposes fresh conventions of contemporary naturalism by facilitating connections with the here and now. In recalling Philip Auslander's idea of televisual intimacy, according to which a contemporary audience whose existence is dominated by moving video images sees in those images a more convincing representation of the real than a live theatrical performance, Peter Campbell argues that the intimacy and shared space and time of the live theatrical performance ironically becomes less real, because it is less familiar than the hegemonic media to which many of us are now accustomed. This perceptual shift is notably present in updated readings of classical works, where digital media reframes the correspondence between their timeless properties and the contemporary spectator's needs. To resolve whatever may feel foreign, incomprehensible, or irrelevant to the source text, it proposes new criteria for accepting the other as own. One also recalls Lehmann's conceptualization of the real and the extra aesthetic in post-dramatic theater. The aesthetic cannot be understood through a determination of content, beauty, truth, sentiments, anthropomorphizing, mirroring, etc., but solely as the theater of the real shows by treading the borderline, by permanently switching not between form and content, but between real contiguity, connection with reality, and stage construct. The cultural coordinates of a global society we can all relate to through language, visual, and oral forms, daily broadcasted and reproduced in the mass media, continue to appear in many theater experiments, intersecting with diverse dramatic traditions and styles, and nourishing experiences embodied by the live performers and absorbed by live spectators. During this revisionist process, the media recontextualizes setting and story and undermines, again, common representational conventions and modes of characterization. It also introduces missing or background information through explanatory imagery or relevant newsfeed. Often, video footage is used as a background for clarifying elaborate or ambiguous parts of the spoken text and providing details of exposition. This may explain, for example, why technology is used broadly in performances of documentary theater. Sometimes digitally induced patterns may contrast sharply with what is physically taking place on stage. Other times, they grant detail and depth to those actions performed live, serving as a kind of subtext to what is happening in the foreground. In Machinal, the mood of the hotel where Helen and the former boss and Karen's husband, Jones, spent their honeymoon is built on a visual contrast. That between the psychological alienation of the two characters revealed in their physicality and of the joy and hilarity reflected in the video spectacle. You can really see it very much here. A spectacle of happy couples watching in the background. Digital references can also serve the reverse function, as in the case of the blooming water lily celebrating the love that blossoms between Helen and her adventurous lover, and which later becomes a key piece of incriminating evidence in her trial. Ultimately, digital media instigates fresh ways of looking at character and interrogates the ways in which we perceive identity today. Faces can be split and merged. Voices can be intercepted, substituted, altered, and regained. Decomposing body from image, authentic voice from its sonic reproduction, technology stimulates tension in the audience, necessitating a creative leap to bridge those clashes in a credible character whole. The competition between the corporeal self, the bodily voice, and the digital reincarnations is taxing, if also exciting, in that it forces us, spectators, to work doubly in order to make meaning out of this duality. In the production of A Doll's House, visual and auditory framing was crucial, given that some performers became both actors and observers of the world on stage. During the two fraught meetings between Nora and Krogstad, the characters' video portraits looming over the performers blur the boundaries between the real and the imaginary, as the mediated images take over, not just as a visual correlative of the live narrative, but also as an essential ontological agent, which dictates the actions of the two opponents. Cozy reflects on the uncanny use of screens in performance as a space wherein we double ourselves and perform a witnessing of ourselves as other, pointing out that the question of the drama is not one of representation of the thing and its reflection, but of the splitting of subjectivity. As the two actors enter the scene of crisis, their digital doubles hanging above them appear to be feeding them arguments and prepping their actions. Their presence on stage is highly authoritative. In their stillness, they assume a power that neither the nervous, if resistant Nora, nor the coercive, if emotionally injured Krogstad can own in their carnal presence alone. Furthermore, in the final, most iconic scene of the drama, the path to Nora's future emancipation is revealed in the projection of a young girl who, arms open wide, rushes out to a good field. In the end, the video addresses the question of how many conflicting identities one person can hold and for how long one's different selves can coexist surreptitiously before they eventually surface fight one another in moments of extreme personal turmoil. And finally, technology makes possible the concretization and validation of missing characters on stage. In Phaedra I, it added an additional layer of complication to the original premise that the title character vocally incorporates all characters present in the myth who are indicated as separate dramatic persona in the script. Auditory maneuvering further recalibrates representations of selfhood. The performance is interspersed with alienating voiceovers of pre-recorded voices that stand for Aphrodite, the chorus of women, the mixed crowd in the nightclub, and Theseus. The audio evocation of character works together with digital embodiment, no matter how fragmentary. The play opens and closes with the dominant presence of the goddess, who appears as a constant vocal reference, but who is also portrayed as a mirage of fire spreading light and setting up the scene for the drama to unfold. On stage, the performer is caught in an internal conflict to reconcile different subjectivities. The absent actors are bestowed a digital presence, in most cases a fragmentary identity, which is torn into video pieces impressionistically scattered all over Phaedra's costume. It is only Phaedra's antagonist, Hippolytus, who stands out from the rest of the characters. He is given a fully electronic body, his mediating carnality drawing attention to Phaedra's sexual fantasies. In the play's most emblematic scene, in which Phaedra confesses her love to her stepson, also speaking his lines, the male character is digitally personified in the projections of three different men's semi-naked shapes crawling up and down Phaedra's body. The body multiplication is there to suggest that Phaedra is enamored not with just one specific person, but with the idea of falling in love and being sexually fulfilled. To conclude, the division and multiplication of the self manifest in the recorded voice of the woman in Machinal, in the ghostly voice that haunts the consciousness of the protagonist in Enter Hamlet, in the digital portraits in A Doll's House, destabilize the viewer's perception of character identity. The fact that the self can now be multiplied or manipulated at the director's will no longer concerns the death of character, an idea introduced by Eleanor Fuchs in her seminal study of 1996, but rather the character's rebirth or reincarnation as a hybrid, existing in a state of liminality between corporeality and imagination. Inevitably, the audience wavers between empathy and estrangement, which produces a kind of nostalgia for the pure body, uncontaminated by the noise of mediation. Such nostalgia falls into what Lehmann understands to be a quest for anthropophany, an impulse to realize the intensified presence, epiphanies of the human body. In post-dramatic theater, Lehmann identifies the break of the theater dramatic mode and the run towards the post-dramatic to be theater's response to the caesura of the media society. In analyzing this new landscape, he ponders on the fascination that the image exerts on the spectator, pondering on what constitutes the magic attraction that seduces the gaze to follow the image when given the choice between devouring something real or something imaginary. Answering his own question, he argues that there is something liberating about the appearance of the image, which gives pleasure to the gaze, as the image is removed from real life. It is the gaze, Lehmann thinks, that can liberate desire from the bothersome other circumstances of the real. The gaze, in fact, can produce bodies and transport desire to a dream vision. Multimedia performance can transport audiences to sides of desire and fear, to an in-between space of vulnerable corporeality and perpetual, if imaginary, potentiality. As such, it can be invariably enticing, enigmatic, addictive, and slippery. The seductiveness of the non-defined, the abstract, the fusing qualities of intermediate strategies on stage may well have to do with a permissive attitude to both making and perceiving art. By reconceptualizing the notions of reality and representation, technology alleviates the director's pressure of having to comply with familiar attitudes to meaning making. This is not so much an anything goes attitude to creativity. As far as the spectator is concerned, the virtual present provides a field of endless possibility. In fact, quote, the electronic image allows and demands to see even the most impossible things. There is no void of another efficacy here, only evident reality, end quote. the reaching out and grasping of other realities, the experience of the interminability of representation is a major source of pleasure. As semiotician Anne Uberstall points out in her essay, The Pleasure of a Text, making this exciting pleasure possible, letting all kinds of images appear, leaving the spectator with a feeling that this pleasure of seeing has not been exhausted, that the whole series of signs has not been fully analyzed or really seen, that he could have looked elsewhere, focused on something different. Do we not have here some of the distinctive traits of good staging? It is the pleasure of the ephemeral and of the struggle against the ephemeral. The kind of pleasure Uberstall describes involves an element of transcendence, a struggle to capture and shelter the intangible, what is not palpably there but can be reached through imagination. In other words, it is a pleasure that is active and committed. Passive pleasure, on the other hand, leads to overintelligence. Using technology purely as a means of flaunting spectacle and production values can neither oversaturate interpretation or make it irrelevant. And I've been guilty of that. I've done it. I know how, alluring that can be. On the artist's part, it can paradoxically slacken imagination, limited as it is to showcase the medium's diverse possibilities, instead of generating an experience of visceral engagement. While digital wizardry feels irresistible, the seduction can be ephemeral and perhaps ultimately devoid of the promise of change, which almost always accompanies the transformational theater experience. In closing, during the long and dreary pandemic years, theater has been inadvertently placed in a position where it has had to cross hard representational boundaries, not only to keep up with the speed of film and the efficacy of the media, but primarily to survive. As contemporary performance keeps metamorphosing, theater virtuality continues to propagate zones of hybridity and fragmentation. Fresh notions of dramaturgy as an operation of theater making, rather than of textual analysis, call for revised ways of training the spectator to appreciate mediatization as a compelling factor of narrative construction and of sensual engagement. In this new landscape, far from being a self-reflexive staging tool, technology becomes a vital compositional language in both the mise-en-scene and the dramaturgy of the artwork, reflecting on the complexities of our mediatized experiences on and off the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avra. We've got time now for questions. And I was wondering if people, we wanted to open this out not only to people in the live space here, but also for people who are listening and watching this via Zoom. So I'll open this out to anyone who has a question for Avra and talk. Hi, I'm Pablo. I was really curious about this when you were talking about the kidnapping. I kind of had a sense that the screen served as a kind of, let's say, a window into some kind of deeper psychological, poetic kind of aspect of the characters. And I was wondering, I didn't quite understand, was that, did the screen, so to speak, belong to one of the characters in that scene, or did it kind of cover the interiority of both characters? And if so, how were those transitions then managed for an audience watching? I said, how do I know that the images on the screen now relate to the kidnapper as opposed to the mother
or the psychiatrist? Yeah. Well, I mean, the entire conception of the play was about this fluidity of emotions and stories and perspectives of the three characters. So it wasn't always entirely clear if this particular image would literally reflect on what one of the characters who was actually speaking at the time was thinking about. But what we created was a kind of set of recurrent visual patterns that underlines the atmosphere or the emotion of the entire scene, so that when this image kept coming back, it may point to something that we already experienced in relation to one character, but this time it was played against the other character, and so it was mostly like alternating perspectives rather than specifically designating one image that played just when Ralph was on stage or the mother was on stage, the other person was on stage, because that's how the play itself was written. I think that everything seemed to mesh, and you had to like really be open to those multiple perspectives being present at all times, constantly and simultaneously.
And then that's another. I was wondering, I was wondering, you thought about flipping the kind of, let's say, power dynamic between the live and the video. As in, at the moment, it seems that everything based on video becomes this secondary kind of tertiary layer to excavating central. So that the kind of primary, let's say, storytelling is happening on stage.
Mm-hmm.
And the video is kind of secondary to that.
Yes, obviously. I mean, that's the challenge, isn't it? I think that with Fade we began working towards that direction, especially because there were so many identities that were hidden in Fadra's dress that would claim their autonomy in different moments of the play, and that sometimes I think they became more dominant than the actual performer on stage. And of course, there's a long way to go with that. And it is something that would be very interesting to stretch and see what if the electronic counterpart becomes the absolute real, and the live performers are kind of, yes, or like, yeah, they ultimately kind of submit to the electronic authority. Yeah, that's an interesting question. But I think, yeah, this is something that we began touching on, but we need to definitely, go further.
Because that spoke in some ways to Robin Nelson, who sort of argues that intermediality in general, digitalization, that actually mediates the life, that's by creating that juxtaposition that actually the ephemerality of likeness becomes even more pronounced, rather than necessarily disturbing that. And so obviously trying to find different ways of perhaps resisting that argument, resisting that inevitability.
Yeah, or pronouncing the inevitability. And just to make a comment on where are we going now? I mean, what is, it's all about how you frame that, and it's an interesting struggle. And I feel that I think that the audience is really like it can be a challenge for the audience at first to see the digital element take over, but yeah, as like, yeah, Auslander and then Peter Campbell argued, we're so used to that after a while we're completely drawn into that part, because that's what we are so accustomed to, this rhythm of the media, that anything that takes place in a different pace, in the pace of and rhythm of a live performance, may feel strange to us, may feel like disturbing in some sense. It's interesting. It's an interesting paradox.
There was no question. I wanted to ask Avra, thank you first of all. What a great example of practice-based research, which I need to steal and give to our postgraduate students, because they're always asking, is there an example? I think this could be one. It's not so much a question. Earlier on you were talking about collaboration between designers, and then the example of Eleanor with the skirt and having to find ways to move with it. So it's not really a question, but I wondered if you could talk a little bit about like what happens in the room to solve and that's a big question, but to solve some of these problems. And then I guess by extension, I started to think about whether in your experience, actors like this, they have to learn to work in this way. What is it like to have this looming image behind you? So I guess it's a question really about learning. How do we learn to do this in those moments, trying to put it together in the room? I think is probably what the question is.
Yes, there is a big question in your question, because I'm not sure actors and directors are so well trained for the kind of patience and struggle this coordination requires. Not just coordination, so creating two parallel narratives that ultimately need to become one. So it is a matter of well, first of all, you need somebody who is technically expert on making the technology work, and that's not always a given. And it can be like very little things, like the projection gets in the way of the actor, and the actor gets upset at that, and there is you sense the competition going on in the actor's mind. That, why does she really use that? Because I'm here, I can take full ownership of my presence. I think during the pandemic, a lot of us have experimented with ways of making that work a little better. So maybe we are a little better prepared. And you and I are talking about this in terms of director training.
Yes.
How do we get trained to even approach this? So I guess what I was trying to say about this method of working with a designer in the room with a dramaturg from the beginning is very important. That the designer doesn't have this private conversation with the director beforehand, or isn't someone who just shows up to, talk to the actors halfway through the rehearsal, but is there to build a sense of unity between those different narratives, the actors, and gaining their trust.
Which then takes a long time and therefore a lot of money.
But that's what I imagine emphasizes the kind of circularity of the creative process, right? Because
yes.
You are in the room, ideas come up, the director designer goes away and presumably records some footage, or right, and then they go back into the room. So it's a kind of chicken and an egg, right?
That's right, and you can share some of those rehearsal processes with the actors. I mean, you can even sometimes present some of the work that I've done with the designer, ideas and drawings to the actors, and then they can come up with their own thoughts on that. It is a question of time. It is a question of trusting the process. That yes, this may feel unorthodox. We're not just analyzing text and getting up and staging it, but we are perceiving text from other angles and entryways too. So, yeah, I think eventually everybody starts breathing in the same space. But as Adam said, yes, money is an issue. Because money makes the equipment right, which makes the process faster and doesn't try out everyone's patience. And also, you may have a thing in mind that just doesn't work with those projectors that you have available or the software available. So, yeah, to go back to your earlier question, I need money to make those explorations even, stronger, deeper.
So you mentioned rhythms earlier, and I wondered whether there's also something about particularly stage actors, theatre actors, that they have a very different sense of what the rhythms of that rehearsal process are, as opposed to somebody who is a screen actor, who I think made the sense that I have dabbled in that world very briefly, right? But there's much more of a kind of that patience that we were talking about, of like actually you're gonna stop now and wait until the sound check, etc. And reset the camera, and then the person, okay, now I'm gonna do my 1 minute little thing, and then I'm gonna sit back. Right, so that stop and start, I wonder whether it's more familiar to film actors rather than stage actors.
Well, this is certainly not a process for method actors who want to have their moment, and you need to move forward with, the projection. But everybody wants to be challenged, and it's still, even though it's been around for several decades now, it's still new to the process. It's still new for actors to be in dialogue with something other than fellow actors, but something that is kind of there and not there. So yeah, it is about, getting everybody in the same spirit of creativity that is about people approaching the same text from very different angles and making it, like creating different textualities that present something that is maybe more exciting in the end.
Do you work with students, Avra, on sort of how they perform with this kind of technology? So again, I think it's the question of training. So you said you think directors need training in this. Well, I think actors surely need training in this as well. I'm just wondering how we sort of begin that process, how you might work with students to prepare them for this kind of work.
Actually, I think students are so much better prepared for this kind of thing than the rest of, than actors who carry their, formal training of, text-based approaches to making theater. So students are also, they're even more eager to try out things because they don't carry any baggage, but also that's their language, that's the world they live in. So apps for them are the everyday thing. I talk to my son, he knows things that I don't even know ever existed or will ever exist. So they're ready to jump into this kind of game. And I think students can be like the best people to work with in a theater project in some ways, because they're so open to being challenged, to receiving new information. I don't know what you think, because you direct the students. So you're more experienced than I am.
It's true. It's a matter of kit, and in our theatre we really struggle with projection.
Beyond the kit, what are the, like, in terms of this way of working? What are the, let's call them aptitudes or skill sets? What are the tools that actors need?
I wonder if it's quite close to film, actually, like hitting your mark.
It is about hitting your mark.
I wonder if it's quite close to film.
To jump straight into and then pause and jump out and stop back to that exactly. I wonder whether there's that kind of ability of being a bit more flexible.
Not necessarily expecting continuity and the flow of the character journey. You can build a journey, but you have to build it through, stops and starts.
Do they, because you mentioned the idea, which I found really interesting, about a kind of character being hybrid because of the technology that they're using. So does that mean that you have to do, as a director, different kind of character work with an actor to get them to think about?
Is it going to be showing certain modes of tonality or dreamlike situations than there has been?
I think it's more a thing for a director to shape and consider. The actor doesn't need necessarily to know how you are approaching this duality, because it will confuse them, and because they do, well, I mean, I understand that they need to have their own process of building a character or embodying a character, and then what you do with the subtext or the other side of that character is a different matter altogether. So I must say, even though I talk about collaboration, there is that element where you actually ultimately control how this hybridity dimension will work for an audience. Yeah, and sometimes actors absolutely hate it when they are competing with the electronic image, or they try not to even think that.
It's like I was just thinking, you know, a long time ago when you know, electric light came in, and which was dimmable. You know, suddenly as a director, there was a whole other thing that you have. We're sort of in that moment of actually, how do we work with this stuff? You know, it's a weird, you know, cycle again.
I couldn't help but think as you were giving the whole interpretation about historical presence, in that, of course, we're going for a very particular moment in some visual work, but particularly the focus on ghosting and ghosts. I mean, obviously, Kara's work and all of that, but that notion that technology and that interest in that liminality, ghost-like spaces, peppers and ghosts, sort of bells coming up, right? That always there's been that aspect of technological sitting alongside the actor to designate or play around with something that is the spectral or something that is beyond the character basically. That I suppose that's been going on for a very long time, but there's almost been an intensification or a change with obviously the potential vision.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, with lighting, you did it with lighting, just one light indicating a presence, or you did it with sound or a voiceover, and now you do it with projections. Or well, it's probably like something that we will always need to have. Like we're always striving to find what other aspects of not just character, but of our world, how the world can manifest itself in different ways. So yeah, so it changes the format, but the essence is I think the same, and it's been around for many years.
Phaedra's beautiful dress reminds me of Loie Fuller's Firebird from the 19teens. So she had sort of bamboo extended. So and then material that she has like 18 electricians kind of projecting the new coloured lights on the stage onto her. And it's been recreated actually. It's really good. Very people look to see that resonance with Phaedra's dress.
Yeah, we keep looking.
Lastly, is there anybody who's watching this virtually who would like to ask you a question? I think we will end it there. It's been a long day for us. We've had a workshop with our students before. So I'd like to thank Avra once again.
Thank you, Graham. Thanks very much.
And as I said, this is going to be recorded, so people will be able to request if they email me at g.j.saunders at bhamac.uk. I'll be able to send you a link for this talk. And it's also going to be uploaded at some point onto our website as well. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
And we're having some people just saying thank you for an amazing talk.
Oh,
I'll see you.
oh.
I was a workshop.
The workshop was, I love the workshop. We needed more time. We needed another couple of hours. But very